All right, I'm going to get going for our last session. There's a lot to cover. I would like just to cruise through. Interrupt me if you want, but really, I'll be happy for you more to interrupt me after I get through the chase. And then we can talk more. But we got to get through the chase first. One thing that's been bothering me that I don't know if I've sorted out yet was the question somebody back there raised, and then someone over here has raised before about, is Melville just playing the same game by saying there's a multiplicity of realities or a multiplicity of interpretations? Isn't that just another totalizing interpretation? Something about that question bothers me. I don't feel like I've ever answered it. I want to say no, Melville's not playing the same game. He's what you do when you're getting out of that game. But I don't know if I fully defended that view. And I want to say one thing and then I'll ask for your help, which is I just think the logic of the view is different. It's a different kind of view. Melville's view is a statement about interpretations as such, about what it means to be an interpreting animal or a creature like us that needs an orientation to meaning and to the sacred. He's making a statement about that we are the kind of creature that needs that sort of orientation, an interpretation of reality, an orientation to the sacred. And that leaves open what the right version of that's going to be. It doesn't make any claim about what you're supposed to go on and say on the basis of that. It just says we are the creatures who give an interpretation to our reality. We can't be otherwise. And if we're lucky, we also have an orientation to sacred practices that give us a sense that our lives are worth living and our activities are worth undertaking. He's not saying what the content of that is. All the other totalizing views out there give you some specific prescription, some content to it. He's saying more like what it's about to live in a plurality of contents. So it's a different kind of game. But again, I'm not sure if I've totally wiggled free of this worry. Sarah?
I think one of the big distinctions is that the totalizing views of life, they always condemn some way of living.
Yeah.
Some group of people, whereas saying that reality is pluralistic, it doesn't condemn anyone.
That's very helpful, exactly. And the people that Ishmael dislikes the most and the characters that come out the worst are the ones who claim they've got the right answer, everyone else is wrong, and not just wrong, but wrong and therefore condemned. So that's a way of making Sarah's point, and that there's not some condemnation tied in with the Ishmael view or the Melville view. It's not a condemnation, but rather a sense that you're missing out. You're going to miss out on what the plurality of realities or interpretations of reality can offer to you if you close yourself off into one totalizing view. It's not a condemnation. Okay, that's helpful, thanks. I kind of just wanted to open with that. I'm saying I'm still trying to wiggle around in that question. And by the end of today, we'll see if we get better at answering it. I'm going to stop in 1 hour from now at 3:15 because we've got to do the course reviews. And Gabriel's going to collect them from you and return them to the office. So they're up here. Remind me to write my name on the board. And okay, so I'm going now. What we want to do is the perspectives on Moby Dick, and then we're going to do the chase. The perspectives on Moby Dick, I'm going to go throughout the book and show you a bunch of different ways Moby Dick itself, the whale, has been interpreted. This should ring the bell for you. It's the Moby Dick version of what we did with the balloon yesterday. So we know that Ahab is on this monomaniacal quest for the whale. He wants to strike through the mask, as he says on page 138. He wants to strike through the mask and find out, get to the truth of what this whale is. He's convinced the whale has maliciously harmed him. And in that sense, that the whale is a representation of the Christian mono-god who's after Ahab himself. And so if Ahab can be convinced that the whale is maliciously after him as a representation of the Christian mono-god, then Ahab knows his life has a place in the universe and it has a real meaning to it. So that's why it's important to Ahab to interpret the actions of Moby Dick as malicious. So he says, "The inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate, and be the white whale agent or be the white whale principal, I will wreak that hate upon him." So he sees the white whale as the vehicle of malice of the universe or of God. But at the same time, he subtly knows that it might not be real. He calls the white whale inscrutable. He longs for a kind of certainty that he subtly knows is not there. And that's what really drives his monomania. I gave you another example of that when we talked about Ahab, and he was talking to the carpenter on the boat who was making him a new leg. And he says to the carpenter, I really like he was admiring the vice grip of the carpenter. And he says, I really like something that lets you hold on tight in this slippery world. And that's a metaphor for his sense that the world is slippery and beyond his grasp, but he's longing for a secure interpretation of it. But let's see the various ways Moby Dick's been interpreted. Ahab calls him malicious here on 154. Which is, what chapter is that? Chapter 41 on Moby Dick. So in the Dover edition, it's page 144, or 154, sorry. At the bottom of the top paragraph, he refers to the whale as a intelligent agent, or he says, the dismembering death that he has caused was not wholly regarded as having been inflicted by an unintelligent agent. It's a little roundabout way of saying Moby Dick is intelligent, not inflicted by an unintelligent agent. And down there a little bit more on the paragraph that begins his 3 boats. Here's that funny passage where on the one hand it says, Moby Dick had reaped away Ahab's leg as a mower a blade of grass in the field. A mower does not reap away a blade of grass with malice. But that's a sentence that describes one way you can look at the way Moby Dick took away Ahab's leg as a blade of grass in the field. And then it switches to Ahab's perspective on that. No turbaned Turk, no hired Venetian or Malay could have smote him with more seeming malice. So Ahab took it as being smitten by seeming malice. And we'll see that again later. Now, on a little bit further earlier than that, Starbuck calls him a clumsy, dumb brute. This is on page 138 in chapter 36. Starbuck says, vengeance on a dumb brute that simply smote thee from blindest instinct, madness. To be enraged with a dumb thing, Captain Ahab, seems blasphemous. So Starbuck sees Moby Dick as a dumb brute, acting out of blind instinct. We get another take on Moby Dick from the Boomer and Bunger chapter, which is on page 354 in Dover. Chapter 100, this is when they meet up with this boat that has these kind of jolly, drunken guys hanging around, poking fun at each other, and just having a good time floating around on the sea, drinking, it seems like. And there's this guy named Boomer, Captain Boomer, and his doctor, Bunger. And they were, Boomer, I think, has had his arm taken out by Moby Dick. But he is not mad. He's just okay with it. He's not interested in seeking revenge at all. And he refers to Moby Dick as, to Ahab, he says, so what you take for the white whale's malice is only his awkwardness. This seems to be close to the Starbuck dumb brute interpretation, but rather than calling him a dumb brute, he just calls him awkward. It's a couple steps up from being dumb and brute, being awkward and intelligent. Now there's two more I want to go through before we get to the chase at the end. There's one chapter in here called the Town Ho, where they meet this other boat called the Town Ho and they interact. They're always cruising around on the ocean and they encounter these other boats, and Ahab always asks them, have you seen Moby Dick? When's the last time you saw him? And so there's a few of these interactions described that we're going to look at, two of them. This one's chapter 54, page 213. See, it's a pretty long little chapter, actually. So this is a whole little anecdote about this guy Steelkit and his antagonist Radney. They have some disagreement on their boat. Steelkit threatens to kill Radney because Radney keeps insulting him. There's a near mutiny. Steelkit gets locked up with some of his co-conspirators. They get let out. And finally, they are the Steelkit, who's been not neck and neck, but at the neck of this guy Radney, and vice versa. Moby Dick shows up, so they go out together to go after him. And Radney insists on being rowed right up to Moby Dick so we can stab him. That's on page 214. And Radney, who's very clearly described as being the bad guy in the scenario. Melville describes Steelkit with a lot of admiration. And Radney is a kind of a weakling, kind of teasing fellow who is described as not with as much admiration as Steelkit. So what happens is that Moby Dick takes out Radney and acts as a sort of moral avenger on behalf of Steelkit. And so that happens here on 214. The whale rushed around in a sudden maelstrom, seized the swimmer, namely this dork guy Radney, between his jaws, rearing high up with him, plunged headlong and went down. Skipping down a few lines, Moby Dick rose again with some tatters of Radney's red woolen shirt caught in the teeth that destroyed him. And what's interesting here is that this is described as an act of heaven. Over on page 213. Complete revenge he had, referring to Steelkit, complete revenge he had, and without being the avenger. For by a mysterious fatality, heaven itself seemed to step in and take out of his hands into its own damning thing, the damning thing he would have done. So it says, heaven itself, in the form of Moby Dick, stepped in and took out this antagonist, Radney, so that Steelkit wouldn't have had to do it. So this is Moby Dick being interpreted by these people who witnessed this whole event. They interpret Moby Dick as a sort of avenger, a moral avenger. Now there's one more I want to draw your attention to, which is chapter 71. The Jeroboam. So they're cruising around, and this crazy guy rolls up on a little boat, and he says, everyone on my boat has been infected with some plague. You don't want to come over there. And they come up, they row up to the Pequod, and they tell their story. And it's this crazy visionary, mystical visionary guy named Gabriel. And he had predicted he tried to kind of take control of this boat with his weird threats and visions. And he had threatened the death of the chief mate, Macy, if they pursued Moby Dick. So Macy disregards this, not surprisingly, because they thought this guy was just crazy, Gabriel, and they pursue the whale, there on page 258. Again, this is chapter 71. A couple paragraphs in, actually it's a couple pages in. Gabriel solemnly warned the captain against attacking the white whale, in case the monster should be seen, and his gibbering insanity, pronouncing the white whale to be no less a being than the Shaker God incarnated. Gabriel, ascending to the main royal masthead, tossing one arm in frantic gestures, and hurling forth prophecies of speedy doom to the sacrilegious assailants of this divinity. And what happens then? The luckless mate, in that same paragraph, the luckless mate, so full of furious life, was smitten bodily into the air, and making a long arc in his descent, fell into the sea at a distance of about 50 yards. Not a chip of the boat was harmed, nor a hair on any oarsman's head. But the mate forever sank. So this mystical prophet Gabriel warned, don't attack Moby Dick. The chief mate directly disobeyed this prophecy, and Moby Dick appears and drowns the guy out of nowhere without hurting anything else. And so this has seen, these people all interpret Moby Dick as being the fulfiller of prophecies, of mystical prophecies of this guy, Gabriel. Yeah, Sarah. That was in chapter 71. That's the Jeroboam story. And so what's interesting about all these little descriptions of Moby Dick is that they act like all the different ascriptions or interpretations people gave of the doubloon. Not any one of them it can be the right interpretation of Moby Dick, because they all are described with some amount of plausibility, and they all can equally well be believed in and held to be true of this mysterious entity, the white whale. So there's a plurality of interpretations available to the white whale, but they don't add up into any coherent story. It's not like they all stack up into each other or add up into each other into one coherent perspective. They're just a plurality of perspectives, like all the different colors of that rainbow that we talk about all the time in this context. It's a dumb blankness full of meaning, all these different interpretations that you can give of Moby Dick. It's interesting that Melville sometimes refers to God too, remember. God is indeterminate as God. He uses that expression a couple of times. And we're supposed to recall that indeterminateness and boundlessness are the features of the sea and are the features of reality that we are cast adrift upon. And especially in a post-monotheistic world where that means, remember, where monotheism doesn't mean the belief in one God, but really the belief in one interpretation of things. Being cast adrift in a post-monotheistic world means having to come to terms with the fact that there is this unboundedness, this indefiniteness to reality that can never be captured in any one totalizing interpretation. There's a multiplicity of somewhat overlapping, maybe completely divergent interpretations. They don't add up into anything coherent. It's like the coral insects creating this beautiful construction, but without any overarching plan. Now Ahab, though, cannot really stand this. At a certain point, he describes Moby Dick with a really weird phrase. This is page 421 in the Dover, and it is chapter 130, the hat. And I just want to grab one little phrase out of the opening paragraph of chapter 130. All his successive meetings with the various ships contrastingly concurred. See, he's going around asking all the ships he encounters, what did they hear about Moby Dick? He gets all these different reports and different interpretations, but Ahab sees them, forces them to add up into his privileged interpretation. All his successive meetings with various ships contrastingly concurred to show the demoniac indifference with which the white whale tore his hunters. So that's the weird phrase, demoniac indifference. It's strange to be both indifferent and demoniac. But in Ahab's case, that kind of makes sense, because for Ahab, for the whale to be merely indifferent to him would be a demoniac reaction to Ahab's demand for an answer, for a demand that this whale live up to his interpretation as being malicious. And if the whale turns out to be simply indifferent to Ahab, it would be as a demoniac insult for him. It would be the worst thing you could do to him, because he's a guy who demands that the universe offer up, that the whale offer up an answer, and to live up to his demand that he be seen as malicious, so that he can interpret the attack of his loss of his leg as an act of the universe or God against him, so that he can defy it. So, now with all that on the table, let's go to the chase that ends the book. There's 3 days of the chase. And Melville makes it so interesting because he builds into each day of the chase a different kind of interpretation of the whale. Moby Dick shows up in a different sort of aspect in each day of the chase. And I just want to take you through that so you can see it. On the chase day 1, which is chapter 133, Moby Dick shows up as, again, the malicious intelligence. That's on page 432 of the Dover. And again, this is chapter 133, probably in about the middle of that chapter. Now, I'll read this little paragraph. By reason of this timely spinning round the boat upon its axis, its bow, and by anticipation was made to face the whale's head, while yet under water. But as if perceiving this stratagem, Moby Dick, with that malicious intelligence ascribed to him, sidlingly transplanted himself, as it were, in an instant, shooting his pleated head lengthwise beneath the boat. He takes the whaleboat in his jaws. All 3 whaleboats are out there, and he seizes the whaleboat in a devilish way. It says down there, a paragraph below. He says, the whale dallied in the doomed aircraft in this devilish way. And right a few lines above that it says, as a mildly cruel cat plays with her mouse. So this is Moby Dick showing up as tormenting the whalers on their boats like a malicious cat tormenting a mouse. And he snaps the boat in 2. I think this is the one where Ahab falls out and he's kind of bobbing around. And Moby Dick starts swimming in this big circle around them. And he has to call in the Pequod to get Moby Dick to go away. So the Pequod breaks up this circle that he's doing around Ahab. And Moby Dick is described as swimming off in frustration. Oh wait, no, sullenly, on the bottom of page 433. As he sullenly swam off, the boats flew to the rescue. So this is the interpretation of Moby Dick as coming at Ahab and the whalers with a intention, a malicious intent. So then the second day is what you can call the day of awkward intelligence. Because on this day, he's not so much targeting the particular boats, and Ahab in particular, but he is just flipping around at random and chopping at whatever pieces of boats come in his way. And he's just randomly going around and slapping things and hitting things. He doesn't show up as maliciously going after things like a cat versus a mouse. And we see that on page 440. Page 440, chapter 134, a paragraph that begins, while the 2 crews were yet circling in the waters. 5 lines down from that. In that wild simultaneousness of 1,000 concrete perils, Ahab's yet unstricken boat seemed drawn up towards heaven by invisible wires. And, as arrow-like, shooting perpendicularly from the sea, the white whale dashed his broad forehead against its bottom and sent it turning over and over into the air till it fell again, and Ahab and his men struggled out from under it, like seals from a side cave. Now, skipping down a few lines. Whenever a stray oar, a bit of plank, the least chip or crumb of the boats touched his skin, his tail swiftly drew back and came sideways, smiting the sea. So there he is, like anything coming around him, he's just flipping out and slapping at it. He's not going after it. He doesn't show up with this malicious intent. He seems to be acting at random, whatever's coming in his path. And that shows him more like the awkward intelligence or Starbucks version of the dumb the dumb brute acting on mere instinct. But of course, Ahab's going nuts because he keeps getting close, and what he wants more than anything else to get right up to the white whale and stick his gnarly harpoon into it. Did you catch that one chapter where he gets this harpoon specially made? What is it? It's chapter 113, The Forge. If you didn't read this whole book, go back and read 113 before you put it down, because this is where he has all the quote-unquote heathen harpooners stand around, and he cuts them open, and they put their blood on his harpoon, and so he kind of blesses his harpoon and the blood of his quote-unquote heathen harpooners, and that's when he says, I should just read it to you. 113, I think this is like 390. It's leading just up to this. The Forge, 387. There he is. It's page 389 in Dover. Tashtego quiqueg dagu, what say ye, pagans? Will you give me as much blood as will cover this barb? Holding it high up. A cluster of dark nods replied, and three punctures were made in the heathen flesh, and then the white whale's barbs were then tempered. And then Ahab gives his phrase in Latin, ego non baptizo in te in nomine Patris, sed in nomine Diablo. I don't baptize you in the name of the Father, but in the name of the devil. Remember, that's what Melville, in a letter to Hawthorne, said was the secret motto of the whole book, Moby Dick. So, Ahab's dying to stick this gnarly harpoon into the white whale. So he says, we got to go out. Do you have a question or a point? Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So then, like when they pass that ship that's coming back to Nantucket, and they've like given up all of their possessions to like fill them with sperm.
Yeah.
Do you think that also represents like an ascent into a type of monomania, but then at the same time they're like portrayed as like being really happy and joyful? I feel like that contradicts like the rest of the work.
I'm not sure I caught the full point. I know the scene you're talking about. They passed by this other boat, and they're all partying because they filled every little crevice they could with the expensive sperm that they can go sell for a lot of money. So they're celebrating on the way home to Nantucket. And Ahab and them are crossing by, and they're kind of like, don't look at me, or something. Yeah. 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 I see what you're saying. I think that the that happy-go-lucky boat are just typical 19th century. They're not monomania to the same degree as Ahab. I mean, they're typical 19th century worker capitalists who can go home and get their paycheck, and that gives them the purpose of their life. So, go ahead. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So they're mono in the sense that they're just comfortable in that interpretation that they've inherited, and they certainly don't want to jeopardize it for the overall quest of really answering the question, what does this white whale mean? They would much rather say, we're out, we're going to go sell our sperm and chill for a couple of months before heading back out to sea. So they're in the mono business, but they're not maniacal in the way Ahab is, because that they would rather go buy the white whale and go home. But the fact that Ahab, by contrast, is ready to just jettison all of the sperm in their boat for the sake of going after the whale reveals his monomania, because he's ready to call that whole thing into question. The whole setup that put them out there onto sea, he's ready to dispense with it if he can get his answer from the white whale about, is it malicious and really after me, and can I get revenge on it if it's the representative of God or the injustice of the universe? Okay, thanks. So that's the thing. Like the interpretations don't add up. All the interpretations we got of Moby Dick don't seem to be adding up. He shows up as malicious sometimes. He shows up as indifferent sometimes. And what happens on the final day? He shows up in a few different ways on the final day, actually. He seems to be showing up maliciously on page 447. So we're in the chapter 135 and 447 in the Dover edition. Moby Dick is described this way: maddened by yesterday's fresh irons that corroded in him, Moby Dick seemed combinedly possessed by all the angels that fell from heaven. So this is a pretty dense interpretation of him as being full of malice of fallen angels. Then this one gnarly thing happens where he breaches, and then Ahab's harpooner, who they call here the Parsi, he's sometimes called Fidela. His like half of his body is strapped to the white whale and held there by whale lines. And he says there, the half-torn body of the Parsi was seen, his sable raiment frayed to the shreds. I don't know what that means. His distended eyes turned full upon Ahab. He's kind of strapped to the whale. Now, in the John Huston, Gregory Peck movie version of Moby Dick, they blow it by ending the movie. They switch it around, and at the end of the John Huston black and white Moby Dick movie, they put Ahab in this place. And Ahab, in the end, is strapped to the whale. But if you take the interpretation we've been defending, that really messes things up, because that puts Moby Dick, it squarely puts Moby Dick more in a malicious zone. And it confirms Ahab's interpretation. But according to what Melville wrote here on page 451, like 4 or 5 paragraphs from the end of the book, what happens? Ahab's been going after the whale. By the way, in a previous page, Moby Dick is described as retribution, swift vengeance, and eternal malice were in his whole aspect. That's on page 450. But what happens when he finally takes Ahab out? Ahab throws his harpoon. The harpoon was darted. The stricken whale flew forward. With igniting velocity, the line ran through the groove, ran foul. Ahab stooped to clear it. He did clear it. But the flying turn caught him round the neck, and voicelessly, as Turkish mutes bowstring their victim, he was shot out the boat, ere the crew knew he was gone. It's complicated, because on the face of it, it was a total accident. He threw his harpoon in, the whale line does this dangerous thing that we described before. He dodged it, and then he ended up getting caught around the neck, and he got flung out of the boat. It was almost on his own fault. It was an accident. He threw the whale line. He couldn't dodge it in time. Moby Dick was just cruising around trying to evade them. And Ahab got pulled out of the boat, plopped right out. He didn't even know what hit him. The crew didn't even know he was gone. Presumably, Moby Dick didn't even know that he did it either. It all just happened so fast, like a mower taking out a blade of grass. What I don't understand in this description, though, is how it says, voicelessly, as Turkish mutes bowstring their victim. I just don't know what to make of that. Turkish mutes, okay, that's why they're voiceless. But what the heck does it mean to bowstring a victim? Jake?
I don't know exactly what that means, but the way I just took it as you were reading it was someone just silently killing someone, like with some
okay.
super crazy sharp string, just out of nowhere, yeah.
Okay. All right, that's useful. That sounds about right. What worries me is that this combines the malice with the indifference. But then again, Ahab described Moby Dick as demoniac indifference. So maybe this is exactly how it should be described, because it's totally indifferent and accidental that Moby Dick takes out Ahab in this way. But then Melville throws in that it's like a Turkish mute bowstringing their victim. But the moral of this story is that multiple interpretations are sustained. All of these interpretations have some evidence to give credence to them. Not any one of them is right about Moby Dick, because all of them are right in some degree. And so the 3 days of the chase reveal the moral of the whole book, which is the whiteness of the whale expressing or being a manifestation of the dumb blankness full of meaning. The fact that the spectrum, the light in which we interpret reality, the light in which things show up to us and seems neutral to us, is actually a light that contains many possible different interpretations, a whole spectrum. And we've seen a whole spectrum now of interpretations of Moby Dick. Now we have to go through the final crazy thing that happens. So the Moby Dick takes out the boat, as you no doubt or hopefully have read. And the ship sinks, and taking everything with it. And we just have to read this insane passage and do something with it as much as we can. So this is just the last paragraph of the whole book. I'm on 451 of Dover. So the boat's sinking, and the guys are still standing on top of the masts. And Tashtego is there. He's the last one sinking. A few pages back, Ahab told Tashtego to nail the flag of the ship, Ahab's flag, to the mast for the end. So here it goes. At that instant, a red arm, the arm of Tashtego, and a hammer hovered, backwardly uplifted in the open air. And the act of nailing the flag faster yet faster to the subsiding spar. So the whole ship is sinking. The tallest mast is still out of the water. The crazy Tashtego is following Ahab's order, even though he's drowning. He's in the middle of drowning. He takes a hammer, and he's nailing Ahab's flag to the last mast. And the act nailing the flag faster yet faster to the subsiding spar. Here's where it gets really crazy. A skyhawk that tauntingly had followed the main truck downwards from its natural home among the stars, pecking at the flag, and incommoding Tashtego there. This bird now chanced to intercept its broad fluttering wing between the hammer and the wood, and simultaneously feeling that ethereal thrill, the submerged savage beneath, in his death gasp, kept his hammer frozen there. So the bird's wing got caught between the hammer and the mast, and Tashtego just keeps his arm locked there to hold the bird with them, to bring the bird down with the ship. He kept his hammer frozen there, so that the bird of heaven, with archangelic shrieks, and his imperial beak thrust upwards, and his whole captive form folded in the flag of Ahab, the bird gets folded in the flag of Ahab, went down with the ship, which, like Satan, would not sink to hell till she had dragged a living part of heaven along with her and helmeted herself with it. That's gnarly. No small fowls flew screaming over yet the yawning gulf. A sullen white surf beat against its steep sides, and then all collapsed, and the great shroud of the sea rolled on as it rolled 5,000 years ago. So we got to make something of this crazy last scenario. What can we make of it, given everything else we've been defending about this book for the whole semester? I can't do justice to every little part of it, but I'll tell you what we can figure out. And this is going to segue into the way we're giving a reading that's inspired by Nietzsche. And then I'm going to read you a passage from Nietzsche here. Because what this seems to represent is the collapse of the decisive collapse of the whole Western monotheistic tradition. How can we say that? We've got the bird of heaven with archangelic shrieks. So the shrieks of the bird are representing angels of heaven. The bird has an imperial beak, which seems to represent the Greco-Roman heritage of the West. the beak thrust upwards. It gets wrapped in the flag of Ahab. Now, Ahab, remember, represents the culmination of the monotheistic tradition of the West. The total culmination of it, of the demand for one total interpretation of reality. So he's the conclusion of that whole tradition. And it's as though that tradition is wrapping in on itself and sinking into the ocean, the unbounded, indeterminate ocean. And not only that, but the bird itself goes down. So, and the bird represents a piece of nature, where nature too has been explained in a monotheistic way, according to modern natural science. We said this in passing a few times, but Melville has the sense that the world has become more and more explained by natural science. And he mocks that. Remember on the cetology chapter where he pretends to be doing an empirical science of the whale, and it's a total mockery of the whole thing. And all the different references to science throughout the book are mocking. So he thinks that Western science has the attempt to explain everything, a rational explanation and a causal explanation of all events. He sees that as part and parcel and an inheritor of the monotheistic tradition as well. So that interpretation of nature maybe is represented by the bird, wrapped in the flag of Ahab, sinking with the ship. And what do we do? The thing I don't quite know what to do with, and I'll ask you for help after I read, if you want to, after I read some of the Nietzsche passages, but why Melville throws in references to Satan and hell. Because it's clear it's not a struggle between good and evil for him. Melville would see the struggle between good and evil, God and Satan, as just part of that package of the monotheistic tradition of the West that is rightfully sinking to the bottom of the ocean. So maybe that's the point, actually, now that I say it. I hadn't thought about it that way. Satan is also sinking. All right, I'll take it. I got there by accident. Now, let's see how close this is to a passage from Nietzsche. Did you bring your little handout? I'll read it to you if you didn't. But it's a passage called The Meaning of Our Cheerfulness. It's from this book called The Gay Science. So I'm going to read you this passage, okay? He's talking about, Nietzsche's famous for this one-liner that God is dead. And he doesn't mean literally God died, but he means the belief, and he says it here, that the ability for Western human beings to believe in a mono-interpretation of reality has left us. It's become incredible. We can't believe it anymore. For lots of reasons, some of them historical, some of them philosophical. Nietzsche thought, for example, that Christianity's emphasis on telling the truth and being truthful about your motivations, confessing your motivations to your priest, for example, became self-reflexive. And Christianity started to ask itself, why did it believe its truths? And it started to wonder that perhaps the truths it had invented for itself were just comforting stories that it made up so as to not face a reality that is too brutal to take. Christians being people in the beginning who were very much stepped on by the Romans, very much downtrodden kind of people. Nietzsche sees them as having invented an interpretation of reality that led them to not have to believe that that suffering is all there was to it. But it turns out their emphasis on telling the truth, they applied to themselves. And what he calls the moral skepticism that Christianity had of pagan religions, where Christianity said, you pagans, you've got it all wrong. Everything you think is right about your morality, we can see as just being an illusion. We've got the truth about your moral views. You're a degraded bunch. You haven't seen the truth. And according to Nietzsche, Christianity itself enabled that train of thought to be self-applied and to have their skepticism that they had for other moralities to be applied to themselves and to start to ask questions, difficult questions about what the source of their moral beliefs were. So according to Nietzsche, Christianity, in a way, undermined itself. There's other historical reasons for believing this, like I said, like the age of exploration made the encounter with radically different cultures. It necessarily made people call into question everything that they had taken for granted about self-evident truths about human beings. Okay, so that's your 2-minute lecture on the death of God. Now I read you this passage. The greatest recent event, that God is dead, that the belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable. That event itself is far too great, too distant, too remote from the multitude's capacity for comprehension, even for the tidings of it to be thought of as having arrived yet. It's a long sentence saying, God is dead, but the multitude can't comprehend what it means yet. Much less may anyone suppose that many people know yet what this event really means, and how much must collapse now that this faith has been undermined because it was built upon this faith, propped up by it, grown into it. For example, the whole of our European morality. So what we're pulling out from there is this fantastical image that Melville seems to create at the end of Moby Dick of the collapse of the whole Western tradition. All these symbols symbolizing the monotheistic tradition of the West are collapsing in on themselves and sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And Nietzsche's got his version of that. I'll just read a little bit of that again. How much must collapse now that the Christian faith has been undermined? Because so much has been built and propped up upon the Christian faith. Morality of European taken for granted morality, for example. The consequences to ourselves are quite the opposite of what one might perhaps expect. They are not at all sad and gloomy, but rather like a new and scarcely desirable kind of light, happiness, relief, exhilaration, encouragement, dawn. So here he switches it from being a cataclysmic event of collapse and destruction to being one that at the same time opens new horizons for life. And that's how he says, a scarcely desirable, because it's still too new and too weird, but a scarcely desirable kind of light, happiness, relief, exhilaration, encouragement, dawn. Indeed, we philosophers and free spirits, a free spirit is a Nietzsche term for a Bulkington-like character who can live without foundations and certainty, live without morality, live without a plan, live out on the sea. But you'll notice a big difference already in this passage. We free spirits feel, when we hear the news that the old God is dead, as if a new dawn shone on us. Our heart overflows with gratitude, amazement, premonitions, expectation. The sea, our sea, lies open again. Perhaps there has never yet been such an open sea. So his version of the Bulkington-like character, the Nietzschean version of the person liberated from the monotheistic tradition, is one of joy and cheerfulness. That's why the passage is called The Meaning of Our Cheerfulness. It's not at all sad and gloomy, he says, but a scarcely desirable kind of light, happiness, relief, and exhilaration. So Nietzsche says free spirits can be ready to leap into this void left by the Christian monotheistic tradition and live joyful, creative, meaningful lives. Meaningful is maybe not the right word, because Nietzsche thinks that meaning in the old-fashioned sense of the term is part of the mono problem. Instead of meaning, stable, recurrent meaning, Nietzsche suggests that we have brief habits, which is another passage we have here on the handout. But just to point out that Nietzsche seems to think for the free spirit this is pretty easy. But remember, in Melville's case, he builds into his account of Bulkington that Bulkington is grim. And even though Bulkington is celebrated and admired so much by the other characters, he disappears. And we're to understand that he falls off the boat and dies. So he doesn't represent in the Melville scheme of things a livable option. So I think Melville would say Nietzsche makes it perhaps too easy. Nietzsche would probably reply that for most people, they're going to be grim and fall off of boats. But a few people, the free spirits, or there's this other weird Nietzsche phrase called the Übermensch, or the overman, or the superman, the people who really have the strength can be powerful enough to be cheerful about this and not be grim Bulkington-like people. So there's a pretty substantial disagreement about whether or not this is a livable human option depending on if you're Nietzsche or you're Melville. Let me push further a little bit with this comparison while I've got the issue on Nietzsche, and read a little bit of the Brief Habits passage, and then his take on polytheism, and then I'll offer some little bit of concluding remark. So like I said, Nietzsche has the view that meaning, the sense that your life has to have an abiding meaning that you can depend upon, and you can always have an answer to the question, why am I here? What am I doing? What's the purpose of my life? Nietzsche thinks that kind of question is also gone, off the table, once the mono-tradition collapses. So in place of that, he offers what he calls brief habits. And this is the little passage we have here. It's from the same book, Gay Science. And it's essentially the idea that you can go along in your life, take up projects, relationships, locations, activities, get into them while they're good, while they feel good, while they last. Get out of them when they start to suck. You don't have to have a plan. You don't have to owe it to anybody an explanation. Your point is to live a creative, adventurous life, not to have to subscribe to moral rules or the expectations of your parents or police. So there's something similar to what Melville's doing with the squeezing of the sperm passage and the overall moodiness of Ishmael, who lets himself get sucked up into different situations and really enjoys them, or enjoy is not quite the right word, because Ishmael also has really horrifying experiences too, but he gives himself over to them. And that's his whole world for those little moments. Either the horrifying experience he has in the Tryworks chapter. The Tryworks are the big cauldrons that they boil the whale blubber. And there's a chapter in there called the Tryworks, I think, where he has these freakish visions and he's totally freaked out. But that's all his world is. He's in this gnarly mood of being freaked out by the harpooners boiling the whale blubber. He goes from that to being squishing the spermaceti with his shipmates. He goes, previous to that, he had been totally sucked up into Ahab's monomaniacal vow to get everybody to help him kill the white whale. So Ishmael is a brief habits-like kind of guy. And one of the things we want to do is try to see where he and Nietzsche differ on this. But it's worth reading this little passage from Nietzsche. I believe that there is something that will give me lasting satisfaction. Brief habits, too, have this faith of passion, this faith in eternity, and that I am to be envied for having found and recognized it. Now it nourishes me at noon, and in the evening, and spreads deep content all around itself, and deep into me, so that I desire nothing else. Think of Ishmael squishing the sperm. Without having any need for comparisons, contempt, or hatred. But one day, its time is up. The good thing parts from me, not as something that has come to nauseate me, but peacefully and sated with me as I am with it. You just get sick of it, done with it. That's what happens to me with dishes, ideas, human beings, cities, poems, music, doctrines, ways of arranging the day, and lifestyles. So here you get the alternative take on how do you live your life by letting yourself be drawn into these momentary, transient experiences of fulfillment and satisfaction without having to cling to them, without having to fit them into a plan, without having to justify them to your parents or to your priest or to the cops. Let yourself adventure on in life by choosing your brief habits. Something like that's going on in Melville too. So they have this idea that if you free yourself from the mono take on things, you open yourself up to this plurality of sources of meaning. Now this, interestingly, is Nietzsche's version of polytheism too, but with a key difference. Nietzsche has a willful interpretation of polytheism. We've been emphasizing over and over again that Melville connects polytheism, where again, that doesn't mean belief in many gods, but the belief in many sources of fulfillment. Many moods that can grab you and show you a significance to be sucked up into and enjoy or suffer for the time until the next mood comes along, the next situation pulls you into it, like Ishmael on his voyage. Melville prioritizes the receptive dimension of this, the sense that there's a mood out there, a situation that precedes you, that grabs you, that you can be receptive to, and let yourself be drawn into without having to cling to it, without having to explain it. You let it take you in. Ishmael has that as a character with that sort of receptivity, and we think of him highly aligned with the Homeric version of letting moods grab you, like in the Helen case. That's why we don't think it's a coincidence that Melville calls for that, has that passage. If some highly poetical nation ever returns to their birthright, the merry Mayday gods of old, blah, 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 the sperm whale will be in Job's seat. You remember that passage? It's from like 287 to 288 in the Dover edition. It's not a coincidence he connects his version of moodiness with Homeric polytheism. But that's receptive. Nietzsche's version of it is very willful. It's almost more Ahab-like in the sense that you're a sovereign individual who can impose your decision, your willpower on things. And for Nietzsche, that's what the death of God and the collapse of the Western tradition enables you to do, is to be a sovereign, powerful individual, making your own decisions and imposing your will on things. Nietzsche's not completely 100% like this. You know, he's a complicated writer who's got many different voices competing for your attention. But one of the main voices in his writings is this willful, imposing, almost Ahab-like character, where human beings have to become gods in order to have killed God. That's a phrase of his. And so if you read the passage from him about the greatest advantage of polytheism, you'll get the sense that he is giving you a message of, we create our own values. We impose our interpretations on reality. It's not about being receptive to the moods and the situations that are out there, but of imposing your will. So I'll just read the last 3 lines of that passage that we have quoted for you. In polytheism, the free spiriting and many spiriting of man attained its first preliminary form, the strength to create for ourselves our own new eyes, and ever again new eyes that are evermore our own. Hence man, among all animals, has no eternal horizons and perspectives. And just above that he says, this polytheism is the preliminary exercise for the justification of egoism and the sovereignty of the individual. So we think that's very much a contrast to the Melville version that prioritizes the receptivity and the moodiness, in the sense that you'll never be able to get the world in your grasp. You'll never be able to understand it or will it to follow what you want. The better plan, according to Melville and Homer, is to live in a receptivity to the moods that are out there. There's a danger in the Nietzsche and Ahab version, where Nietzsche and Ahab represent the culmination of the monotheistic tradition, where human beings come to attribute to themselves the powers that they had previously attributed to God, and they give themselves the power to decide the meaning of their reality. If you can decide the meaning of your life, the meaning of your reality, if you can go online and order any food, listen to any music, choose any person to have sex with, get on your GPS, find anywhere to go without any effort. If everything is at your disposal, at your fingertips, nothing matters to you. You've got no risk. You've got no vulnerability. You've got no sense of gratitude when things work out. You have no sense that Melville just gives to Ishmael when he's squeezing the spermaceti with that total joy. If you're a willful imposition of your will, that's what you get, but you don't get gratitude and fulfillment. And that's the danger. That's nihilism. That's the danger of the willfulness of the Ahab or the Nietzsche person. And that's what Melville can provide, and Homer can provide, is the return to the sense of the receptivity that moods can give you. But it's not so easy, unfortunately, because there's also very destructive moods. And I sometimes, Bert is much more radical than I'm comfortable with sometimes about this, because I think you're more ready to say, there's no control you can have over moods. You have to let whatever ones are around take you in, and you can't control them. and the highest form of human life, like Homer saw, we can now get back to that because luckily the whole monotheistic tradition of the West has sunk to the bottom of the ocean, and now we can be receptive to moods again. But there's really bad, nasty moods out there, and I would be afraid. I don't want to get in an Ahab mood. The Ahabs of the world are scary. Is there a way to be moody and receptive without falling victim to the dangerous dimension, the dark side of the moods that are out there? Melville doesn't answer that question for us, and I don't know what to say about it. Do you? Okay.
I wish I did. So you said that like this kind of viewpoint that Nietzsche and kind of Melville are expressing is that it will inevitably lead to a sort of nihilism.
Yeah.
How is that nihilism related to or different from the nihilism that we got at the end of Dante?
That's a good question.
Because they feel completely opposite.
I think they're the same in a way. The result would be the same, which is that the meaningful differences between things get leveled. That's one way to describe nihilism, where one thing doesn't matter any more than anything else. And when Dante turns around and sees the earth, the pathetic, dusty threshing ground, or whatever he calls it, he doesn't give a damn anymore about Beatrice or the politics that he was invested in. All of those, the differences between loving Beatrice or loving somebody else doesn't matter anymore. And the difference between the one political faction that he really supported and the other ones who he thought were ruthlessly corrupt doesn't matter anymore. So that's the sense that those distinctions are obliterated. That's a kind of nihilism where nothing matters more than anything else. Melville tries to save us from that by saying things can matter to you. You can get local temporary meanings by being receptive to the moods. And I was saying the Nietzschean Ahab version of nihilism means that you don't have any stake or any vulnerability, any joy in the way things might work out or not work out. No sense of gratitude for how good things might be going if you don't have to put any effort into it. If you can simply impose your will, choose your friends, choose your partners, choose your conversations, choose your food, then that means the distinctions are leveled again. That it doesn't matter in the sense of ordering pho from Grubhub and having it delivered to you gives you no elation, no sense of involvement, no shared experience of cooking with your community or squishing spermaceti or whatever. So your line of fulfillment is flat. And I think that's what the end of Dante also has, except that in Dante it's a line of fulfillment that's flat, but also because it's compared to the supreme being God. In that sense, it's very different. I'm not sure if I fully, after having heard everything I said, I don't know if I'm satisfied with the way I said it, but something like that in that direction. But we can talk about it more another time. Theo?
I don't know if you're going to talk about this.
Well, I can't really.
At the end of the book, very end, Ishmael is saved by Queequeg's coffin.
Damn it, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so in the end, Ishmael's in Ahab's boat, so he's given over to Ahab's mood in that sense. But then Ishmael himself does not save himself. He puts himself in danger by following Ahab, but Queequeg's way of life is what saves him.
Thank you for bringing that up. It's an important thing to not leave behind. That's the epilogue. You know, the boat goes down. Ishmael pops up. He's the only one that survived. Again, he's an orphan, and he gets buoyed out by Queequeg's coffin that plops up out of the vortex. So Queequeg's coffin is the only thing that survives the rubble. It's the coffin that you recall is carved with the he tried to copy onto the coffin the tattooing of his body. And we took that to mean something like the tattooing of his body is an expression of the understanding of being of his culture, or that understanding of being in Queequeg gave him a strong character, a non-monotheistic character. He had something like, he's basically the same level of hero as Ishmael, except for the fact that he goes down with the boat at the end. So we have to think, according to Melville's take on things, it looks as though Queequeg was also somewhat infected by the mono-tradition Christianity in some way. I'm not sure what to make of that, except it seems to be suggested by the fact that he's gone down. His boat, or his coffin, however, carved with those hieroglyphics, seem to represent that way of being that can have an orientation to the sacred in a non-totalizing way. Because that's what Queequeg was, and that's what his culture seemed to make available to him, is that he can have his practices, his orientation to the sacred, and not impose it on others, and think that he can learn from other interpretations. That being said, he drowns and goes down with the rest of them at the end, so it's kind of enigmatic. That's as good as I can do, is saying that that coffin represents the possibility of having an orientation to the sacred in a non-totalizing way. Gabriel?
I mean, I was just going to say, like, that's why it's also really cool that it comes out of the ocean, which has been symbolic of our, like, sort of, like, void, or, like, vastness of meanings. And the one that comes out is not the bird or anything else, it's just Queequeg's coffin, which is supposed to be representative.
Yeah. Well, I have to stop because now you have to fill out the evaluations, but I'll miss you.